Hello everyone, this is somlyai-çakır from Medyascope. I greet you from Hungary, where the government announced a state of emergency on the 11th of March to fight against the coronavirus outbreak effectively in the country. Then on the 20th of March, the government submitted a bill to the parliament and demanded that the state of emergency should be extended until further notice. On Monday, 30th of March, the bill was voted in the parliament and passed. Thus, from now on, we will be referring to it as the recent act that extended the state of emergency in Hungary with no specific time limit and granted the Prime Minister Viktor Orbán with immense amount of power. And now what will be next? At the other end of line, I have two guests who will be telling us more about this act. Tamás Latman, who is an international law expert. Welcome, Mr. Latman.
Hi, welcome. Thank you for your invitation to this interview.
Thank you. And Dalma Dojcak, who is the Director of Political Freedoms Project at the Hungarian Civil Liberties Union. Welcome, Ms. Dojcak.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Thank you, both of you, for participating in this interview. Without further ado, I would like to leave the floor to my guests. I would like to start with Ms. Dojcak. The Hungarian Civil Liberties Union was among the four non-governmental organizations in Hungary to stand against this act when it was first proposed, when it was the bill then. What was the reason or main reasons behind your objections to this bill?
The Hungarian Civil Liberties Union and the other NGOs who jointly issued this statement are watchdog organizations, and we conduct our work to act as a check on the government, on every and all governments of Hungary. And at this point, we believe that there should be a very immense danger that the government is fighting against being checked by any other branch of power in the state or any other actor in the society. This bill that was already enacted by the parliament since contains provisions that allows the government to postpone this special legal order for an unlimited time. And we believe that it's unconstitutional, as it's very, very reasonable that the government has extended power in the time of such an immense crisis. But we also believe that this power shouldn't be unlimited, both in time and both in power. At this point, what we see is that the government has this unlimited power for unlimited time, which is a very, very dangerous situation for democracy. And we call for at least a definitive timeline in which the government should hold this position. There were many options suggested for the government. The most prominent was, I believe, 90 days. I think that would be a good solution for this problem. But this piece of legislation was enacted in the form that there's no time limit for the government to govern and legislate in decrees, which is basically a situation in which the parliamentary powers and also other democratic procedures are absent from the Hungarian public sphere at this point.
Mm-hmm. Yes, you also mentioned, looking at this act from outside, one may say that this is an act taken against the coronavirus outbreak and it aims at fighting with it, so faster and better. To act quicker, the government might have needed this, which basically the main argument of the governing party in the country. But turning back to you, Mr. Latman, I would like to ask what makes this law controversial? We mentioned setting no time limit. Ms. Dojcak mentioned that this was the biggest problem. And what else? Because what kind of other amendments this law includes? or why else this act is being controversial?
Well, first, I think that we shall make some facts clear. First of all, this act does not give any extra power to the government because the government already exercises extra powers based on the constitution, the so-called fundamental law. And when more than 2 weeks ago, the state of emergency was instated by the government, ever since it is exercising these vast powers and extreme powers, which may be needed or maybe not needed. I think that this is not the place for this debate here. I believe that in the most cases it might be needed. The problem with the current act is that instead of providing necessary tools to the government, it basically reframes and restructurizes the text of the constitution itself by removing the standing controlling powers of the parliament. According to the constitution, according to the fundamental law, every regulation or decree adopted by the government in the framework of the state of emergency shall be confirmed by the parliament in every 15 days, thus providing the parliament with standing controlling power. Now, this law, this act that was adopted, first of all, it's against the constitution. It violates the fundamental law, so it shall be deemed unconstitutional at first hand. But instead of giving any extra powers to the government, which it already exercises for 2 weeks, it just removes controlling possibilities of the parliament as a whole. So basically what we have now is that the government may adopt government decrees under the constitution, but instead of those decrees losing their legal effect automatically after 15 days, they stay alive for as long as there is the state of emergency. And even more, there is the second problem, which is even more problematic, that the constitution says originally that the government decrees lose their effect by the end of the state of emergency. But instead now this new law says that the parliament reaffirms and confirms these government regulations, and the legal effect of these regulations will end only if the parliament, with a special step, with a special action, removes them from effect. Now, basically, nobody understands what this means. I mean, it seems logical that the parliament shall make a separate move on these decrees, which is constitutionally very hard to understand because we are talking about governmental decrees. And the biggest problem is that even if the government decides that the virus is gone, the state of emergency is over, but this still requires a special step from the parliament, and the government constitutionally may not oblige the parliament to make this step. So then politically there's going to be this situation that the government is going to be able to point the finger on the parliament, arguing that, well, according to me it's over, but the parliament will not do it. And this is an unconstitutional, it's a constitutionally extremely uncertain situation. And I just don't believe, and I just don't trust that whoever is responsible for creating such an uncertain constitutional situation just doesn't understand what he's doing. I believe that there is a reason behind this.
Looking at what this law is suggesting and what kind of amendments it includes, in addition to just extending the state of emergency until further notice, there were some articles included as to people might be subject to imprisonment if they violate any condition of quarantine, or they might be subject to imprisonment if they spread fake news or information about coronavirus outbreak, which would restrict the actions of the government. This is another problematic aspect of the act that has been discussed within the society and by both NGOs and also lawmakers. So I would like to ask actually both of you about this, but going back to Ms. Stoichak, looking at these articles included, and also looking at both national and international news outlets writing about Hungary, they all draw attention to the recent decade when it comes to limiting the role of and effectiveness of the civil society in the country. What would you like to tell us about this recent decade based on your experience as someone who works at an NGO? Why does this act make everyone feel so much worried?
Well, violation of free speech rights and causing journalists to work harder and harder is not a recent thing in Hungary. What we've seen in the last 10 years, I would say, is that journalists, independent NGOs, and other professionals who routinely criticize the government on a professional basis have to face intimidation, smear campaigns, and sometimes legal consequences as well. This new piece of legislation is an amendment to the criminal code, and it basically contains very vague categories. And my main concern with this new amendment is that it quite easily can cause a chilling effect on people who wish to exercise their free speech rights, because the wording of the amendment is so vague. We don't really know at this point what are the actions that can be punishable by law in this situation. As you mentioned, any jeopardizing of the state actions concerning coronavirus are punishable, and also any distortion of true information is punishable. We don't really know at this point what distortion means. It can easily mean that any criticism of the credibility of governmental sources can fall into this category. And this can have a quite serious chilling effect on both journalists and, I would say, healthcare professionals as well. Because, for example, if you say publicly that the statistical numbers published by the state are not true, or even you just say that they are not exact or accurate enough, you can find yourself in a situation when there's a legal procedure initiated against you. We don't know this at this point, and it's even possible that nothing will change and people will be able to express their opinions as nothing happened. But knowing the past few years and how the state and the government is willing to silence critical voices in Hungary, I'm quite afraid that this new piece of legislation can result in serious legal procedures that can harm freedom of expression in Hungary.
Mm-hmm. Keeping these in mind, turning back to Mr. Latman, recently Hungarian Minister of Justice Ms. Judit Varga wrote an article on an opinion piece, actually published on Politico journal, and she argued that the opposition's reaction to the law is unnecessary, as it doesn't threaten democracy in Hungary, but the act only helps the government act quick enough, and take measures against coronavirus outbreak. Also, Fidesz members on Monday, during the plenary session at the parliament, gave some examples from other European countries or European Union member countries, such as France, where the state of emergency measures are taken, and they mentioned how effective it is. What would be your comment on this response of the government to the criticism?
Well, my first comment would be very short. I would be very happy if the minister would not really write opinion pieces about facts, because we are not talking about the same thing. And The question how European countries are regulating this issue and what kind of provisions they have introduced are basically facts. They are not questions, they're not subject to opinions. And the fact is that there is practically barely any European country that has introduced a state of emergency based on their constitutionally regulated provisions. What the European countries have been doing was they have introduced state of emergencies, mostly based on their health care laws, which are specific state of emergency opportunities, and not general state of emergencies like the Hungarian constitution makes it possible. Of course, different European countries have different constitutions, so you don't really need to compare. Most of the EU member countries have introduced some sort of extraordinary legal regimes, which is once again a fact. And another fact is that there's only one, namely in Slovakia, which makes it possible for the government to practice these extreme powers without any specific time limitation. So these are the facts. There are a hell of a lot of reasons of why this happened like this. But as a matter of fact, Hungary is unfortunately unique on the question, except for Slovakia, that they are running a state of emergency without any timely control. And the problem now is that with this new act, this has really become a vivid problem, because if you remember what I told before, only based on the fundamental law, on the constitution of Hungary, there was this so-called automatic time limit of 15 days of the government decrees losing their legal effect. And now the government actively has switched off this time limit. So I'm very happy that the minister has opinions on this matter, but we shall be looking at the facts. And I believe that Politico should be caring much better attention about their good reputation on reporting about facts.
Thank you. Now I would like to turn to both of you with this question, actually, because we talked about European Union countries and the measures taken within the European states. Hungary is a member of the European Union as well, and starting from last week, we started hearing some voice against what's going on in the country when after the NGOs reacted and also academicians reacted on the issue inside Hungary. Then the European states also reflected on the issue. But what do you think about the reactions from the EU and member states? Do you think that their response was on time and enough, or what might be your expectations from now on? Because now this bill passed and it became a law. So it will be effective from now on. What are your expectations from the other EU members? Maybe starting with you, Ms. Stoichak.
Actually, I just read, it was published a few minutes ago, like an hour ago, that the European Commission announced that they would be looking into the emergency measures used by every member state. But there was an emphasis on how Hungary used these emergency measures. I believe it's very important that the European Union bodies will scrutinize these amendments to the Hungarian legal system. And I believe also that it's very important to feed these improvements into already existing frameworks, such as the rule of law procedure that is available for the European Union. I think that the European Union has the capacity and the means to force member states to comply with European values and the core idea of democracy and Europeanism. So I hope that in the near future we will see that these values will be enforced by the European Union bodies.
Thank you. And you, Mr. Latman, what would be your opinion on the matter?
Well, I would not like to be seen as the pessimistic here, but let me be let me be a little bit skeptical about this. I mean, I don't have any problems with the European Union as such, but we need to clarify the fact that the European Union is working along the lines provided by EU competencies. And basically, when we are talking about, for example, health-related issues, it's not in the EU competencies, it's member state competence. So the European Commission related to health issues has a very limited power over what member states may do. If we consider the current situation correctly as a rule of law problem, then the European Commission and the European Union may have some stronger competencies, especially to what was mentioned by Ms. Deutschak about the possible rule of law proceedings. But if you look at the available rule of law proceedings according to Article 7 of the EU founding treaty, you understand that it is a political process. And the problem with this proceeding in this situation is that the Hungarian government is surely going to argue with the emergency situation, that whatever they were doing is just they were fighting against the coronavirus. And the European Commission, I'm not 100% sure, that is going to engage in such a political legal battle where the political arguments are much more easily understood from the opposition and the legal competencies base is pretty weak. So I would like to draw the attention, while I believe that the European Union has a strong political pressuring power and it's very useful, but where we need to turn our eyes to is maybe rather more the Council of Europe, especially when we are talking about rule of law constitutionality. I would just bring in the Venice Commission, which is responsible for these kind of questions. And sooner or later, the legal issues may be entertained by the Strasbourg-based European Court on Human Rights, when we are going to come to possible individual complaints based on human rights violations under the extraordinary legal regime by Hungary. And as we know, the Strasbourg Court has its own jurisprudence and very well established practice related to extraordinary legal regimes. So that is going to be something additional to the European Union, which I believe that we will have to pay attention to.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much for both of you for your contributions. Now I would like to ask once again before we close the discussion if you have anything to add, any comments to make.
No, thank you very much.
No, I'm fine. Also, thank you.
Thank you. Seems like this is a bit early for Hungary to know exactly what is coming and what's going to happen, but we drew a general frame on what might be coming and why the mentioned act made the society and civil society and also academicians worried about what is going on within the governmental measures in Hungary. Thank you very much, and thank you all for watching us.